It's time, reacting to my way too early 2023 mock draft from basically a full year ago. This was posted on May 4th, and this is being uploaded on May 1st, of course, of 2023. Now, the first hurdle you have to get over when you're doing a way too early mock draft is identifying the prospects. That can be difficult enough. Oftentimes we know about a year in advance who the top prospects are going to be, and I'll say some in this video, and we'll see how this ages. And of course, I'm doing a way too early 2024 mock draft. Probably will be out tomorrow. Caleb Williams, Drake May, those guys are going to be guaranteed at the top right now. Things could change, but those would have been the first 2 overall picks probably this year had they been draft eligible. The second hurdle is doing the projection. Because some of these guys, in the case of Akili Ringo, who I know will be my first corner off the board in this video, he just didn't ever live up to his 5-star status and was a little bit inconsistent in 2022, and that's part of the reason he fell in the 2023 NFL draft. And then the third hurdle is matching the players to the team. Now, we might, roughly know where some of these prospects are going to go, where they're projected. Getting them to the right team, basically impossible because we don't know the draft order yet, and things really could change. There are always teams that take bigger steps up than their Super Bowl odds, which are how a lot of these are based on. But okay, we can finally get into it, and we'll see how things looked a year ago, and now that we know how it went a few days ago. The 2022 NFL draft is barely over, yet we're already looking ahead to 2023. Start with the Texans at number 1. Okay, so we did get the Texans getting Will Anderson Jr. Now, the interesting thing about this is that he was not the first pick or the second pick or the Texans' first pick in the draft. He was the 3rd overall pick. We knew about him for a while. Ultra productive in the SEC. It's not entirely surprising to see him go very high. So I'm happy about that. We did get CJ Stroud right as the 2nd pick. We just obviously didn't expect the Texans to be picking back-to-back. Paris Johnson Jr. was indeed the first offensive tackle off the board, and he may have been the number 3 overall pick had the Cardinals actually stayed at their draft spot. Instead, the Jets performed well enough to get out of number 3. And then we had Bryce Young as the 4th overall player off the board. He ends up going first. So I think we did pretty well overall. These were all guys who ended up being top 6 draft picks, with Paris Johnson going the furthest down the board. But Bryce Young ended up being QB1. I think I'd probably say in this video that I had preferred him to CJ Stroud at the time. It was just projecting based on size that he was going to be the first QB off the board. This is a tough one because this obviously could be a quarterback, but with the way Davis Mills played as a rookie, I think you can anticipate him to continue to improve. Ooh, and that's fun. So Davis Mills did not continue to improve, was not good enough in 2022, didn't really have a ton of help either, but yeah, the Texans were in a position where they really needed to go out and get a QB, but, it is what it is. Moving on here, we had Jalen Carter at number 5, ends up going to number 9, but he really lived up to his actual draft billing, was someone who was thought to be maybe the best player in this draft when the 2023 draft rolled around. Just drops because of character issues that we clearly did not know about at the time, but was very good player. This was, not a surprise to see him go high in the draft. Tyler Van Dyke to the Giants at 6 is the first massive miss of what could be many more in this way too early mock draft. He ended up getting benched for a time at Miami. He was someone who had a pretty good 2021, and 2022 was just all over the place. And, looking at it now, it's tough because you can see, all right, not a crazy arm, below average average athleticism. It's just he was very accurate at Miami in 2021. 2022 is just a bit all over the place, but it's tough because you look at a guy like Joe Burrow, for example, and you see, all right, average arm, it moves pretty well in the pocket, but he's got, such incredible accuracy and pocket movement that he ends up being, an amazing quarterback prospect and goes number 1 overall. It's tough when you're projecting guys to take steps up and then they just don't. It's like, that's how Tyler Van Dyke's at number 6. And now, looking back, it doesn't make any sense. But no, I can't ding myself too much. Panthers, we had quarterback Will Levis. Well, they ended up picking at 9, moved up to 1. Levis was someone we thought could maybe go as high as number 4 to the Colts, number 2 to the Texans even. I never really bought into that, but some people thought it was very possible. And he falls to number 33, but it was really a fall. Everyone kind of expected him to go higher. Did have JSN right as the first receiver off the board. He falls to number 20, slot receiver. Yeah, that was one thing I should have kind of thought about more and will, maybe correct in the 2024 mock draft, is slot receivers are just not going to go high. Linebackers in general are not going to go very high now that Steve Keim is no longer the GM of the Cardinals. So we gotta take into account more positional value. And we did see a running back go at 8 and at number 12. So maybe you can sneak a couple of them in. But they got to be a really, really good prospect. And, we'll see how my 2024 mock goes. I could see one or two sneaking in, maybe Rocket Sanders from Arkansas, maybe Travion Henderson. I know everyone's going to be pounding the table for Blake Corum. We'll see what happens with that. I've had the Jags going Jalen Carter. He was the best player on the Georgia defense, at least defensive line, last season. I think that's fair. We'll skip forward here. Had the Seahawks going Anthony Richardson. This was something that absolutely could have come true at number 5, but he was off the board. Indianapolis Colts took him at 4. This was completely betting and banking on his upside. It ends up coming to fruition, and he goes a pick ahead of where the Seahawks could even draft him. Took a lot of heat at the time for this, but ends up being a pretty good take that AR could be a top 10 pick. Healy Ringo at number 10. Obviously, didn't take the step up that we kind of thought he might, and falls to very early day 3. Eagles, of course, snag him. And everyone was pretty surprised about him falling. Some people have kind of pointed at maybe 5-star syndrome and saying, hey, this guy really, he thinks he's the man, doesn't really have the work ethic. We'll see if that ends up being true. The Eagles could get a stud. And this was the first real one that, I think I was drinking the Kool-Aid too much with Noah Sewell at the time. And being like, hey, he'd definitely end up being a top pick. Was really, really productive at Oregon. But then you look at it and you say, all right, average athlete, not really a complete 3-down linebacker. Those guys just don't go very high. Noah Sewell ends up going on day 3, I believe, as well. And then Myles Murphy to the Vikings. He was someone who was super hyped up. Thought he could go even earlier than this at the time. And we had him all over in these mock drafts. Ends up sticking in the first round, going at number 28 overall to the Bengals. Don't really mind it. For a height, weight, speed, arm talent type freak like Anthony Richardson. Eli Ricks to the Eagles at 13. It's not in their usual draft MO, although I still could see it happening if a cornerback prospect's good enough. Eli Ricks was really, really good at LSU. Was not quite the same player at Alabama, and he's a little bit, I would say, limited athletically. Falls out of the draft. I don't know for what reason. I thought he would have been drafted for sure, but falls out of the draft entirely. Bijan Robinson, my guy from Texas. I'm sure I gave him a ton of props at the time. Ends up going at number 8 to the Falcons. We had him at 14 to the Raiders. It's just tough to project how high a running back's going to go, even if the player's amazing. And I think Bijan Robinson is an amazing, amazing player. I could have seen him going even earlier than 8, depending on what team was picking. But, yeah, it's tough to slot these running backs in. Jordan Addison, the Patriots at 15. They ended up picking around here. I think they had the 14th pick when it was all said and done leading up after the season. Ended up trading back, taking Christian Gonzalez at 17. Jordan Addison ends up being the 4th receiver off the board, because Quentin Johnston went at 21. Zay Flowers went at 22. Is probably not even in this. And then we have Malachi Moore at 16. I think he went back to Alabama, so he'll be draft eligible again in 2024. So maybe he makes the first round, but injury kind of hurt him. And then Brian Branch took over his starting star role at Alabama in the nickel. And a guy I'll probably have, I would say, further down the board just because of his position. He is one of the most highly coveted transfer portal players that is heavily linked to USC. So I've decided to just kind of predict that. I forgot that happened. Yeah, Jordan Addison actually had not transferred to USC at the time. This was a bold call to put the USC logo on Jordan Addison when he hadn't transferred there yet. But, I guess the writing was on the wall, so I can't blame myself too much. But I don't think I would do that again. Just because, yeah, man, he wasn't there. I can't say he's there. Peter Skoronski at 17. We knew he was going to be one of the top offensive linemen in this class. Dolphins end up having their first rounder forfeited, which we didn't know at the time. And I think Peter Skoronski is my second offensive lineman off the board, which is what happened in real life as well. He was taken at number 11 by the Titans, who desperately need receiver help. I had them going Kayshon Boutte from LSU. He had a bad 2022. Character issues drop him all the way to day 3. Patriots grabbed him. But yeah, I still see it with Kayshon based off of his previous tape. 2022 was just real bad, and the character stuff, you wonder if he's ever going to be, a star or not. But, down the board, I can understand why the Patriots would take a chance on him. Michael Mayer was my first tight end off the board. That did not end up being true. It was Dalton Kincaid. Kincaid went to the Bills at 25. They moved ahead of the Cowboys. And then it was actually Sam Laporta before Michael Mayer, who I believe was the 34th pick in the draft, or picked at number 34. Yeah, Mayer to the Cardinals. In hindsight, with Trey McBride, they have a number of other holes now, but probably wouldn't have them going tight end if I could do this over, even without knowing how the draft went, just because it's not a great fit for the Cardinals. I think I was just trying to get Michael Mayer into this first round and just couldn't find a spot for him, with Kayshon Boutte going to the Titans. Colts, I had Isaiah Foskey. His 2022 was also pretty disappointing. I know he put up some good numbers, but he was just not quite. He didn't take the step that some of us expected. He still ends up going top 40, which was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. But yeah, the Colts ended up obviously picking way higher and going with the quarterback. And it just gets worse. Dante Demas, big injury. Is a big part of the reason that he was not drafted in the first round or at all. Just not a fantastic athlete, and the athletes go higher. He's a little bit limited, but maybe some of that is to do with injury. Big jump ball type receiver. But yeah, I mean, we had the Ravens going receiver, just, of course, did not end up being Dante Demas. I wonder if I have Raheem Jarrett in this first round as well, the other Maryland receiver. I think I do for sure. Joey Porter Jr. ends up going 10 spots down the board at 32 to an AFC North team, just not the Bengals, but had him in the right range. I would say the same for Felix Anudike-Uzomah. I hyped him up a ton. It seemed really early for him at the time to a lot of people, but he ended up going first round at number 31, I guess technically, to the Kansas City Chiefs. And yeah, I really like the player. Had him going to the Cowboys. Ends up going to the Chiefs instead, who were formerly from Dallas, the Dallas Texans. Antonio Johnson at 24. His 2022 also was just not amazing, unfortunately, for him. Ends up going to a different AFC South team in the Jacksonville Jaguars. But yeah, just not as good as 2021. Falls to day 3. Jags get him. I think that's a pretty good value. We'll have to see how he plays. At number 25, at the Chargers going B.J. Ojulari. He ended up going near the top of the second round. I think he was at number 41. So not awful there. And I think in the second round, the Chargers did go with an edge rusher, Tuli Pulotu. Seahawks had them going Marvin Mims. It's tough. Oklahoma's offense was just a disaster in 2022. Marvin Mims didn't produce enough to be a first-round pick. Was a second-round pick, though. Broncos ended up snagging him. Tape's pretty good. Slot starter. But again, it's tough for those slot guys to go high in the draft. Got to keep that in mind for 2024. And maybe in the case of like an Emeka Ibuka, maybe he doesn't go quite so high. Jahmyr Gibbs did end up getting into the first round. He was actually linked to the Dolphins. The Dolphins were thought to be a team that wanted to trade up for him if he was available in the back end of the first. Ends up going at 12 to the Lions, obviously. Tough to predict a running back going that early, but did get him in the first round. And then Trenton Simpson, just more athlete right now than true 3-down linebacker. But we had the Lions going with a linebacker, just happened to be Jack Campbell. Simpson falls to the Ravens in the third round, but I don't hate that overall. I still could see a linebacker going in this range, so I think I would do that again. And then wrapping things up, very interesting. Had Josh Downs going to the Packers. They just don't draft receiver in the first round. Got to approach that differently in 2024, but ends up going to the Colts in the 70s, I think 79. Really good player, like Josh Downs. I thought he could have been a first-round pick still. Brian Brzee had him at 30. I think he goes at 29 to the Saints. Chiefs end up going, obviously, with Anudike-Uzomah, we talked about earlier. But Brzee, yep, I mean, I wish he could have gone a little bit higher. I do like the player. But we did get him into the first round, thankfully. And then back-to-back safeties. The league just doesn't value the position. They just don't. Jordan Battle at 31 ends up going a little bit later than that. I think the Bengals got him, pretty sure, in, I want to say round 3 or round 4. And then Brandon Joseph fell out of the first round entirely after transferring from Northwestern to Notre Dame. Just limited a bit athletically. Decent ball skills, though. Could be a nice UDFA pickup for somebody. I'm sure he's already signed at this point. But yeah, Bills still could use a safety, but didn't know they were going to re-sign Jordan Poyer at the time. All in all, I don't think it was too bad. This is obviously very, very tough to do. I think we did an especially good job with the top 10. Let's go back and look at it. Will Anderson, top 10 pick. Stroud, top 10 pick. Johnson, top 10 pick. Young, top 10 picks. That's 4 out of 4. Moving on, we had Jalen Carter, top 10 pick. That's 5 overall. Will Levis was not. JSN was not. Tyler Van Dyke, obviously, is still at Miami, so he wasn't even in the draft, in case you were curious what happened to him. And then Richardson was a top 10 pick. So we got 6 out of 10 in the top 10 at least. And then the rest gets a little bit tougher. Bijan was a first rounder. Jordan Addison was a first rounder. Miles Murphy before that was a first rounder. JSN was a first rounder. Will Levis was just on the outside looking in. Michael Mayer was on the outside looking in. Foskey, kind of the same deal, was top 40. Skoronski was a first round pick. Porter was the first pick outside of the first round. Still went top 32 though. At this time, we still thought there were going to be 32 first round picks in the draft in the first round. Who would have thought? Stupid. Anyadike Uzama was a first round pick. Johnson Falls, obviously, we talked about. Jahmyr Gibbs was a first round pick. Ojulari was just on the outside looking in. Marvin Mims went a little bit further down the board in the second round. And then Brzee was a first round pick. Downs, obviously, top 80 at least. We'll take that. Yeah, all in all, not too bad. It's a tough thing to do. I'm pretty happy with how we did. And in 2024, we'll aim to get a little bit better. Even though I will say I feel less good about it looking at the projected draft board. It feels like it's going to be tougher this year, but we'll see what we can do. I can tell you I feel pretty good about the top of it in the fact that, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Marvin Harrison Jr., all barring something weird happening, will be top 10 picks. Joe Alt, I think, as well. Olu Fashanu from Penn State. I feel pretty good about those guys. And then it starts to get a little bit more difficult. I think Jerzon Newton is a sleeper. I might end up getting into the first round. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot right now. Dallas Turner from Alabama. Jared Verse from Florida State. It'll be interesting. You guys are going to have to see that video. Check it out when that comes out. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.